Hello everyone, it's Rev Nhien. We are live again here at Evolving Enneagram, and today I'm going to be interviewing my Enneagram podcast co-host, Reverend Ogun Holder. So let's take a look to see if he is here yet. Hello, Lindsay. And is that Mia? Great to see you both. I am waiting to see Ogun pop up here so I can add him. Hello. I know. There's our social 9, waiting to hear about the sexual 9. Ah, so you were listening to the podcast. That's amazing. Wonderful. Yeah, so I hope Ogun is on his way. Feel free to start with any questions you might have for us and for him as we navigate this together. Wonderful. Yeah, the Evolving Enneagram podcast. I don't talk a lot about it. We were taking a little break, etc. So there you are. Okay, Ogun. So Ogun, I am inviting you again here. Hello everyone. We are here about to interview Ogun Holder, and I'm simply kind of waiting to have him join us. It looks like he's on the chat. Feel free to introduce yourselves and even let us know where you hail from. So he's working to join us right here and now. But as he does, again, today we're going to talk about the instincts and the instinctual stacking. And of course, any questions you have around it, feel free to chime in the chat. But we'll focus today on Ogun's journey as a 9 whose stacking is sexual, self-preservation, and then social as his blind spot. So let me see if I can invite him to join now. He's been kind of working to join here. Ogun. Thank you for your patience. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, Ogun, I invited you again. Ah, there you are. Wonderful.
I'm here now.
Yeah, good to see you. And thanks so much for joining me here on this Instagram live for our first time together. It's a little weird because normally we do a podcast and we have this drill that we normally do. So I'm going to kind of drop that for now, our little check-in that we do, and just really take this opportunity to launch in and talk about you personally.
My favorite subject.
Yes, personally and professionally, what's up with you, especially as it relates to the Enneagram and the instincts. So I'll actually, your bio is in the comments already, etc. So I think really I want to hear more personally about, first of all, your personal journey with the Enneagram and how you came to know your type and then the subtype in particular, and then we'll flesh that out as it unfolds. So yeah, Ogun.
Hi. So yes, I first encountered the Enneagram when I was in seminary. You and I attended the same seminary, not really at the same time in the same classes. There was some overlap, but yeah, I was in seminary and I needed to do an elective to graduate. And there was this Enneagram class, and I'm sitting in the class and the professor's going through all the types. And as he's going through the types, he didn't group them by, head, heart, body. He started from 1 and circled around. And as he's going through the types and styles, he's like, if you think this relates to you, raise your hand. And I found myself raising my hand a lot.
Yes.
And I said, we got to like 6, and I'm a little confused because I've raised my hand like 4 or 5 times because it all seems to fit. And then he says, wait till we get to 9. And we got to 9, and the generalized description of the 9 was, one of the nicknames was the chameleon, the person who, really sort of adapted to not so much the situation, but to the person they were with. And as he continued to describe this type, it suddenly explained up to that point, and mind you, I'm 30-something years old at this point. It explained basically my entire life to a T. Every choice I'd made, how I felt about life, how I felt about myself, it just like clicked into place. So that was my first exposure, how I first fell in love with the Enneagram. And as time went on, and I did some more, study and reading, and I as we talk about these subtypes, I really realized that piece about merging with another and losing myself in another, that was really my MO. And it wasn't just, at the time in my relationship with my wife, and after she passed away, subsequently other relationships, but it was really about all the relationships in my life. I became who I felt that person not just wanted me to be, but who I would become so that they would be okay, right? Which often meant putting my needs, my desires, what worked for me on the back burner, sometimes out of the kitchen altogether. It's only, I think, in this current relationship that I'm in with a partner that I'm with, that I think it's the very first time in my life that that being mindful of that is at the fore. And I'm always checking in with myself. And when I've shared this about me with her. So she's always checking in with me too.
Yeah.
So that's the Cliff Notes version of me and my relationship with the Enneagram.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is important to note, as we shared in the opening, that you identify as a sexual mind. And I'd love
Yes.
to hear about, after you learned about the instincts, like how you located like what your stacking was. Yeah.
So it was about spending some time, once I read about what they were, really spending some time, a lot of self-observations of both thoughts and actions, and how I responded to things as life popped up, where my thinking was. So it was more of a, I guess, a self-assessment, if you will. And that sexual type, I mean, again, with the idea of the merging, like, I realized that was huge for me. What was also huge was the self-preservation. And interestingly enough, that really came to the fore. I mentioned a few minutes ago, my wife passed away like 6 years ago, and in my grief response, that self-preservation really came to the core. When we talk about some of the ways sometimes we describe self-preservation, it's that idea of what do you call it? Not binging. What's the way? Overindulgence in things sometimes.
Right.
I turned into I call it grief shopping. What's the term? Retail therapy.
Yes.
Right. That was huge for me. The drinking and the eating, and the grief really overwhelmed. So for me, I realized that even though that sort of lingers all the time, it's not what drives me most of the time. but it was definitely up for me during those first like 2-3 years of when the grief was a lot more intense. And then as I found myself in other relationships, both especially the intimate romantic ones, then it was very clear that sexual subtype was still primarily at work there. So again, it's really about I would say to people, it's really about being mindful and self-aware of who you are, the choices you're making, and not just the choices you're making, but where those choices coming from. That maybe that the wounded parts of yourself, the unhealed parts of yourself that you're doing your best to avoid. That was my sort of investigation into myself. And I would say that now that I'm very much more aware and mindful of that main subtype, the sexual subtype, it's really made this current relationship that I'm in profoundly different and profoundly healthier, because I'm no longer living from, the overarching fear of the nine is, being rejected because, I'm not going to be loved enough, which was, so my ongoing journey is always about learning to love myself and feeling worthy. And my partner, she challenges that all the time by in a weird, this is not a complaint, but she loves me a lot and shows it. And when she demonstrates it in all the ways that she does, she happens to be a 2. So she loves she loves being in that helper mode. But when she demonstrates it for me, it challenges me. It pushes my unworthiness buttons. It pushes the do I deserve this? Sort of deal. We just had a recent example. I posted on a little, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I have a favorite cereal that I love, and it's really hard to find. And she was aware of this, and she was scouring grocery stores unbeknownst to me. And then one day she showed up with like 5 boxes of it because she found it at some store we don't usually buy groceries. And she showed up with these 5 boxes, and I was like, and at first I was shocked and I was glad, and then all of a sudden I felt myself like it almost hurt, right? It was so weird because right away it pushed that I don't deserve this. And you're probably thinking, dude, it was just boxes of cereal, like, what is the big deal? But it wasn't the cereal, of course. It was the gesture. It was somebody went out of their way to demonstrate love in me, that they heard my need and made it a priority for them. And I remember saying to her, "Is this what it feels like when I give you flowers?" Because it was like, oh. So, anyways, and she also challenges when she gives me a compliment or says something good to me. I deflect it with humor, because again, it's that sense of unworthiness and not loving myself. So she's called me out on that. And now when, she pays me a compliment, says something good about me, and I say, "That was really sweet. Thank you." She goes, "Well done." You're getting so much better at that, right? But it's still, the default is still for me to be uncomfortable with that, which might come to a shock for a lot of people who know me, because I don't hesitate to, publicly, I don't hesitate to let people know how much I think of myself, right? Not necessarily in a narcissistic way, but people say I have a healthy self-esteem. And I think a lot of that is really, again, my work in the outcome, the progression of my work of loving myself and not losing myself in relationship to others, which, as I mentioned, that's always been my thing. And I'm 47, and finally I'm beginning to get a handle of it. Better late than never.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to kind of provide an overview for those who might be a little bit new to the Enneagram, like instinctual stacking as it relates to the 9. But what Ogun's been talking about is, again, his stack is sexual, and then self-preservation, and then social as his blind spot. And that what it's looked like for you, Ogun, as you were sharing, is like when you first learned the Enneagram, there was a strong, so all 9s have an element of merger to them. And you mentioned the word like love a few times, right? Love is a big thing for the 9, because holy love is kind of like that facet of unity, of reality that the 9 has lost sight of. It's sort of like the universe is filled with it, sort of. You know, the sun's shining, right? But just not on me. Like, it's like somehow like I'm outside, you know, even though there's general positivity to the universe, there's something about where I'm outside. So the strategy of all 9s is in a way to merge with that which is important, that which is filled with light. And so depending on your subtype, the dominant variant, it would affect like what you actually merge with. And so this is really important, because self-preservation, when that's dominant, those types don't always go along at all, and often don't, because what they're merging with is the creature comforts. It's like you're going along with the couch. I mean, really, you know, so those 9s aren't as, you know, what the cliche 9 of like, oh, just going with your flow. They might be very stubbornly staying where they are. And there tends to be a little bit more of again, merging with creature comforts and with habits and routines, to where it's almost like a rocking chair, like a numbing out through that, you know, overeating, overspending. It's very material. It's very physical. In fact, self-preservation 9s are lookalikes to 8s. I mean, there's like an 8ish quality within all self-preservation 9s. Now, what Ogun was talking about as a sexual 9 is merger, but not necessarily like with general people, but it's like merger with like your significant others. And that could be early in life, you know, not a romantic partner, but like say a mom, that kind of thing. But when someone's significant, there's something about attaching to identity. So there's an abnegation of even knowing, as you said. So, you know, not only were my needs like, my needs weren't just back burner in the kitchen, they were not even inside the kitchen, right? Like they were so far afield of like my scope of vision, right? Like, so that's what can happen where there's almost like a conspiracy with 9s and people in their lives, especially very dominant personalities, you know, to where like, you clearly know what you want, and so this will be easy. Like, so I will just lose what I want. I mean, very unconsciously until people find the Enneagram, right? And so what you're describing in your marriage, years ago was this, that abnegation of selfhood, right? And the reality is that when you suffered such an extreme loss, you know, the passing of your wife, that you know, there's if you've merged with something and it's gone, there's a lostness there, right? So you know, moving to the next thing, which was creature comforts, right? Because you're not about, you know, you're not jumping into another relationship. You're kind of leading okay, okay, let's talk about that too. Okay, if you're willing to hear about that, I would love to hear that, because that would actually help. You know, I know a lot of I actually work with a lot of sexual 9s, and first of all, I want to say sexual 9s tend to be a little bit more romantic than, you know, other 9s, just a little bit 4-ish, even in quality, a little bit more nostalgic, just like a type 4. A 9 is past oriented and doing repressed, so they and withdrawn. They fall into a lot of the same categories, right? And so, yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit about that piece with the sexual, like with that being taken away, if you will, and the desperation. So relocate, if you will. Yeah.
Yes. So I did that, right? There's this saying that when you know better, you do better. That's not always the case, right? So I did do that. I did jump into other relationships very quickly after my wife passed away, and that's not uncommon when someone loses a spouse, especially for men generally. But for me, it was exactly as you described. It was like my mooring was gone, and I was floundering, because as much as I knew about the Enneagram, I was very slow in really applying the teachings in my own relationship, in my marriage. You know, I knew these things, but I still subscribed to the happy wife, happy life sort of mantra. So when she passed away and my mourn was gone and I was floundering, when I found myself drawn to someone again, they're always very strong women, women who are very clear about who they are and what they wanted. Like it was almost like a harbor for me. Look, I can go duck myself there, and be guided. It was initially very settling and calming. And I realized eventually it was also using it to avoid the deep work of what the grief had opened up in me. So I literally jumped into a relationship. I mean, it was just a couple of months after she passed away.
Yeah.
And that relationship lasted about 6 months. And then like another month or two later, I jumped into another one. And in between those and among those was really when the creature comfort self-pres was doing its work as well, right? So that was happening. But what also happened was then about a year later, the anniversary of her passing was approaching or approached. And those who have lost someone very close to them, there are certain dates that really stand out. Birthdays, maybe your anniversary or something. But the anniversary of her passing really, really hit me hard, and I knew that I had no business being in a relationship with anyone, because I didn't even know who I was in the scheme of all of this. So I extricated myself from the relationship and spent arguably not enough time on my own doing that work. And then when I felt I was in a much healthier place, I got back into another relationship that lasted about 3 years, and it was a very meaningful and significant relationship. And it took a little while, but I realized I was doing the same thing again, the merging, right? And when I became aware of that and was able to step back and ask myself, who am I in this? Where am I in this? And if I wasn't doing this merging thing, would I be with this person, who, by the way, is a lovely person, but it was not so much about her as it was about who I was or wasn't.
Yeah, got it.
Right? Who I wasn't, which was fully being me. So as much as that was painful for me, I realized I can no longer be in this. Now you're probably wondering, well, why didn't you just be you? Why didn't you just start being you? And the truth is, I did. The last few months of our relationship was me truly being me fully, and that's when we realized the incompatibility. And it was hard, but I realized I had to walk away from that, and now I'm with someone who truly honors me being fully me. Now that doesn't mean I get to get away with everything, because again, I'm a work in process. But there's definitely, I definitely feel safe and willing to show up as who I am. And when she notices that I'm not doing that, because it happens to be someone I've known for 8 years, so she knows me pretty well. When she knows I'm not doing that, she calls me on it. Yeah. And that's really powerful. I've never had that experience before. And again, in the midst of all this, the reflex is to go back to the merge. It's to do the merging again. The reflex is to not put myself first. And I don't mean that again in a narcissistic or uncaring way. It's about being clear of what my needs in any given situation are, and even more important, being clear to communicate them to my partner. Because in the past I was clear, but I didn't always communicate.
Right.
Somebody asked me, what is the secret to a good, healthy relationship? I said it's 3 things: communication, communication.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, what you reminded me of as you were sharing is in one of my writings for like the daily reminders, the Enneagram reminders for the 9, is that
Mhm.
check of, are you the protagonist in your own story? Like,
Yes.
are you the main character in your own life story? You know, and for most 9s, initially, no. It's sort of like
Yeah.
I'm the sidekick, right? Like, and that's the
Right.
difference we were talking about. It's not about being narcissistic. It's about actually laying claim to being the subject, the main actor in your own life, right? Yeah, Lindsay's
Yeah.
like, yes, it is, you know. And I see that there's a question there as well about self-preservation blind spot, and I will try to get to that in context here. But I want to address first, Ogun. So yeah, I'm so grateful that you opened up about this piece of it, because you're not. I mean, it's true of 9s, but it's also true of sexual subtypes across the board. This like sort of overemphasis on that kind of like that significant other, in a way where there could be a series of like relationships or overlapping relationships where there isn't, you know, sort of space, and the importance of recognizing how our dominant instinct, and this kind of does go feed into that question there, our dominant instinct isn't necessarily the one we do well. It's often the one we
Mhm.
do effectively. It's often the one that when we take our passion of our type, in your case, sloth, which is also known as self-forgetting. It's not laziness per se, but it's like a self-forgetting. Add that to partnership, like that's where it's going to happen the most. And that's the idea
Yeah.
behind, you know, like, so there's a passion of the type married to the the specific instinct, and that's where the passion of the type gets exacerbated. And so kind of related to the question here as to, can I have a blind spot in self-preservation when I do well in finances, food, exercise, etc.? So I like to look at it like this. Take a look at your dominant instinct, and take a look at like all the things that you do in your life, that even if you're doing it in other areas, for instance, someone who's self-preservation on top, you know, still wants a partner to be secure and at home and then stay there forever kind of energy, but they do tap into their sexual energy to go get that partner. So that doesn't mean that like somehow they're good in the sexual or now they're a sexual subtype. They're still using it usually sort of in service to the dominant instinct. And so if you're good in finances, like I mean, I will like own up that like I'm sexual dominant with self-preservation blind, and but yet I worked out consistently most of my life and took care of my health in that way, and realizing later that, you know, it wasn't because I really cared about well-being and health, you know, like my energy levels or things like that. It was about trying to be like the perfect partner. Like it was really about partnership. And so if you look at your behaviors and really look at like the underlying motivation and what area you're trying to meet with that, yes, it's possible that you can be good in finances, but you do want to look at it. Like if you've always been good with finances and home things, maybe you want to look at self-preservation as even being your middle. So just to answer that question. Yeah. But to go back to Ogun, yeah. So understanding that in the lostness of the partner with which you've merged, the, you know, jumping to another merger object, if you will, and then recognizing that that can only go so far, right? Because if you don't show up, like relationships just don't go well, right? For either
Right.
of you. And so kind of really reaching that point where the wake up call of having the anniversary of Jen's passing, and then couple that with probably just over time, like we suffer when we don't live our truth in our lives, right?
Yes.
And so the learning, and then, you know, you also coming into the Enneagram, the learning to assert your truth and be with it. And then I think it does happen that when we believe this about ourselves, we also attract a partner who mirrors that. And then you end up, of course, with, how beautiful is that, with someone who identifies as a type 2. And so you can look at that like, oh, she's not going to let you get away with abandoning your needs, because like
Yeah.
it's her business kind of to attend to your needs and remind you of it. But it's almost like her need to give, really it triggers whatever woundedness you have around what most nines experience, which is, of course, I want attention. I want, but when I get it, all the stuff about I don't deserve it and I don't really matter, like that comes to the forefront. And being able to be with that pain is so essential. Like that discomfort, if you will, is so essential to to relinquish the egoic identity of, in a way, there is a little righteousness about the nine, right? Like one of my students said it so beautifully when he said, well, it's sort of like, it's almost like a pride in my humility, my egoic identity to like not being that narcissistic person, not taking that stage. And so it kind of, you confront the ego there to say like, that's your story, right? And so the nine's journey of like, whoa, receiving this is just, I receive it. It's not like, overinflated or underinflated, right? So yeah. And then the other piece you shared, Ogun, about leaning into creature comforts, etc., which leads us to the fact that we haven't even talked about your blind spot. So, which is something that most people don't talk about naturally, right? Like it doesn't even come up in conversation. And so I want to share about this aspect that if you go back, folks, to my Instagram number one with Lindsay, and who's here on our chat here today, you'll hear a social nine chatting, and she's sexual blind. And so just that compare and contrast to understand the role of the instincts. But I want to say a little of that the social instinct. I mean, I'm guessing if sexual and self-pres are on top, if you've got your partner and you've got your creature comforts, why leave the house? Why leave the house, right? Yes, them, right? And so
it's like you're here right now. This is exactly what it's like.
So that's the growing edge, right? That's the wholeness. That's the sexual instinct that overdoes it, right? Like our dominant tends to overdo it, and it's fine until it's not fine, right? Until we realize, oh, well, I haven't maintained and sustained my community or my friendships beyond this partnership. I overemphasize that. So I want to talk about that a little bit and see where that's coming up for you in your life. But, yeah.
So right now, not as much because now that I know better, I actually am doing better, right? But when I look at my past, yes, I did have a pattern of neglecting other relationships for my primary relationships, not going out with friends, not cultivating that community outside of my main relationship. That was a pattern for me, especially in my 20s and early 30s. And I was married to a one as well. So that was a whole other dynamic. But now again, I've realized the not just the value, but the healthiness for myself. And like you said, once those two primary subtypes are taken care of, then why leave the house? Why engage with other people? Why do all that? But interestingly enough, what happens then is when I don't engage with other people, basically then I've put all the needs that I have on my partner. And no one person is ever gonna meet all those social and even a two. Right. So no one person is ever going to meet all those needs. So it took quite a few years to realize that. And here I was thinking I was doing the good husband boyfriend thing by devoting all my time and attention to my main partner, or at least the vast majority of it. But then now I've learned to realize that no, and my partner now is very encouraging. So I think we both classify ourselves as like introverts. So we both like hang around the house and so on and so forth. And it's every once in a while she'll say something like, "Hey, wait, you haven't played tennis with so and so for a while, or you haven't done this for a while. Why don't you go do that?" And it's always fascinating to still watch my old triggers come up. So like, friend of mine will make a date to go play tennis, And right away, still the old tape in the back of my head is my current partner. Her name is Ava. Will Ava be okay with this? Like will this bother her that I'm doing that? And there's that initial hesitation to go play or whatever. And then I'll remember, no, this is a meeting of needs of mine, which make me a healthier version of myself, so I can then be in a healthier relationship. And sure enough, I'll say, hey, I'm talking about going to play tennis and such a date. I don't think we got anything going on. And she'd be like, oh, absolutely, please go play. So she's excited for me to go into. And again, there's some people out there listening going like, this is not that big a deal. I'm like, yeah, for some of us it is.
Yes, it is.
Some of us, this is a huge deal. And even though I know that she is supportive in this way, again, the reflex after so many years, the reflex is still, I don't want to make her uncomfortable by looking after myself.
Right, absolutely. And that is, so when we talk about, okay, so nines, when I do typing interviews for nines, the word comfort comes up, right? And there's also, of course, conflict, and it is an issue. And so there's this idea that and people pleasing, that's another term, and so this, again, it's not necessarily all people, and this is why the instincts is so important. Like, we have social nines who will displease their partner readily in order to not displease the group, but sexual nines, not so much. Like, in fact, it's several levels. One level is, oh, did I even let myself know what I want? That's level one. Like, oh, okay, I know what I want. Does what I want potentially displease my partner? That's like level two. It's like, that's the question. And if you're in a doubt, it may never be articulated. Like you didn't even ask, like, right? And it's like, oh, I know she doesn't like that, or she likes to hang out, Sunday afternoons or something like that. If it potentially, because of that, my identity then is not about me. It's about keeping that connection and so that keeping the person happy is a way of keeping that connection and merger, and then continual self-abandonment happening. So that everything for a nine, I'd say, those of you who are with nines, know nines, are a nine, that the path of individuation, that term is so powerful for the nine, because most people are a little too distinguishing, right? Like me, mine, but it's like the nine needs to take that journey into, oh, I have a different thought, I have a different want, it's different from yours. Like, this me over there, oh, if I'm over here, we're separate, right? Like, to bear that freak out moment of feeling that sense of separation, and knowing that connection isn't based on that conformity. Connection isn't based on that merger. It's based on something that can withstand individual identity and distinct needs and wants, right? Like, the nine needs to learn that in your body, right? And so you spoke to that, Tara, and fortunately, learning. So again, this particular stacking is going to fall into a trap if you don't stay woke, if you don't stay conscious. And it's like a gravitational pull back into the old way, even if you know better, right? And so there's a path of always checking, like, oh, like, I feel so happy right now because my partner's happy, I'm pleased, and there are good sports on, I've got my beer. What else do I need? Right? And only realizing that, oh, like, over time, what that does is I've given my partner all the power to define my worth, right? That's too much power that people don't actually want, right? That, like, how can,
no, they don't,
right? How can, like, her raise the eyebrow, like, destroy your day, like, but if you don't have other friends, as you said, that places where like you are significant, that you matter, and this is the only place, it becomes way too it becomes way too risky to leave it. So you create a cycle, right, of staying. So cultivating the social. I want to talk a little bit more about that, knowing, again, also that you're a minister and you build community, presumably, as a minister. And so I'd like to talk about you leaning into that edge around the work it takes, because it does usually take a little bit more oomph to have to work our blind spot, you know, to like have that sustaining power, if you will. So yeah.
Well, it's what's fascinating is I've observed about myself is as much as in my, you know, very close and intimate relationships, that there's that whole thing about keeping her comfortable, right? Putting myself in the back burner. As a minister, I have absolutely no problem making others uncomfortable. Right? It's weird. Like my mantra is like, you know, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, right? This is like the ministerial mantra I live by. So I find it fascinating that doesn't necessarily show up for me professionally, except what's that?
I say in your blind spot. Like the passion doesn't
Right.
show up in your blind spot. Yeah.
It does not. But what I've also noticed is that there's still a discomfort with getting close to people in the community, for me, and keeping myself at a distance. And I think that leads back to that whole I don't deserve this sort of deal. I'm realizing, but part of it also for me, so that's one aspect of it. But another aspect is also that that fear of missing out, needing to be a center of attention, piece of it. And again, not in a narcissistic way, but when we look at that social aspect of it, it's for me, it's come across again as that I want to know what's going on, and the only way for me to really know what's going on is to make sure I'm in the center of it all. So I think in many ways that has, I wouldn't say it's what's led me to my profession, but it's what I have to be mindful of, in terms of being a minister, to constantly remind myself, yes, folks look to me, but it's not about me. And I can get lost in that idea of needing to be in the center of it all, to have that need met. So it's a weird dynamic having that compete with the general need to keep everybody happy, around me. I don't know if I
And you
answered your question well there.
and you know, not everyone teaches wings, but you identify with an 8-wing, is my understanding as well. And so there's
Yes,
that, you know, it's two very different energies, right? The 9 and the
it
8.
is.
And that, you know, your anti-racism work and your, you know, your fight for
Yeah.
justice, you know, and that piece that kind of takes you out in the world, right?
I've read, I forgot who said this, but I've read that of all the types, when it comes to wings, if you subscribe to the wing theory, from all the types, the 9 is the most uncomfortable one, because you got that one wing or that 8 wing, and those are both wings that almost in many ways are diametrically opposed to how the 9 wants to show up in the world.
Right. Right. They're very direct. Like those.
They're very direct. Yeah.
Yes.
Very direct,
Right.
sort of deal, which, interestingly enough, again, my late wife, we were married for like 16 years. She was a 1, and her directness, right, really enabled my lack of direction in many ways. So we sort of, and you made an interesting point, because, you know, that's not everybody with a 9 wants the responsibility. And it took us years to figure out that she didn't want that responsibility of being the one who always had to know what was going on, had to know what the right choice was. But when she felt like she had to, she did. And I was glad, because, you know, if you're making the choice, we'll go along with what you want, and everybody will be happy. And that did not work, you know, well in the long run. I remember, we really started to work with the Enneagram around our, I'd say, 7th, 8th year of marriage, right? And we know the 7-year cycle. That 7-year itch is a real thing. So like we really realized at that point in time that we were using the, for lack of a better term, I guess the downsides of our types to really enable each other's further downsides. And we had some tough questions to look at and address, and it took us years to get out of that dynamic that we had so firmly established for a while, and sometimes it got real messy, but we got to a place, I think, where we were able to again find some common ground, find something that worked for us, and then just it took us a good few years to do that, and then another 7-year cycle rolled around. That was a whole other thing as well. But that's the other thing, and not to get too off track, but that's another thing to be always mindful of, right? We have all these different cycles in our life, and when these cycles come up, again, they're trigger within us. All those the subtypes, the blind spots, they trigger everything, and we have to be aware of that, right? So for me, it was again questioning, do I deserve to be in this relationship? Do I deserve to have someone love me as much as they do? When they're going through their own cycle of change, and not so much reinventing, but taking a new look at who they are. Now I'm going like, oh my God, they're changing. How do I need to change to make sure that I can provide that comfort for their change, right? So it's always, something's always being triggered. And we always, this is what I've also learned to do a lot better is, for me as a 9, when I recognize that I am defaulting to the you tell me what you want because I don't know my own need right now. When I realize I'm defaulting to that, I have learned to do a much better job of saying, I don't know what I need right now in this moment. So if it's not urgent, give me a little time, I'll get back to you.
Wow.
Right? And then go into the discomfort of realizing, looking for, okay, what do I really want here? I don't know. Why don't I know? Do I really not know, or I just don't want to admit to what I really want to happen here? So I got to do all of this self-inquiry, and depending on the situation, it can be instantaneous, or sometimes it'll take hours, it'll take days. And if there's an urgency at play, then I'll say that. I'll say, I don't know now, but I see that a decision needs to be made now. So what do you think? And I'll see how that resonates with me in this moment, right? So it's all about learning these tools to implement for different situations to account for these default ways of being.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderfully said. And as we come to a close for today, I just want to kind of briefly reflect back what I heard and kind of add on some stuff from people I work with who identify, as 9s, and in particular as sexual 9s. You named something that's so important. And for anyone in partnership with a 9 or someone who is a 9, to recognize that, like, even just the notion that you're entitled to take space and time, you just need to know to ask for it. That, like, okay, I'm going to go back a step. The first step I want to say is, like, it sounds like in your partnership, what I said earlier, when it works, it works. Like, when it's working, when someone's direct and likes to get their way and the other person doesn't, like, perfect. Like, other person wants to abnegate. It works until it doesn't, right? To the point where, over time, the 9, who's a legitimate human with needs, was like, wait, like, somehow I'm over in Alaska and I thought I was headed for California. I don't even like the cold, like, kind of, it's that sort of awareness, that wake up call. But I want to say that in partnerships where there is a lot of initial compatibility, it can actually reinforce type. There's a way in which it's only when it breaks that type's like, wait, like, no, this is not sustainable, right? So before we close, I do want to get that question there real quick. But let me, so I want to say that there's that piece of, like, oh, and so sometimes for those of you who are in partnerships where it's like maybe starts out not aligned, there could be some tremendous, like, inner work that can be had that's helpful during that time, right? So it's not necessarily about finding harmonious versus not harmonious relationships. But when everyone knows that 9s are withdrawn types, and that nines can get overwhelmed, right? Because they want to take in all the opinions and data, and they're like sifting through to find which is mine, right? Which is mine. And that even you were naming that many nines will first know what they don't want before they know what they want. So if you give these options, they'll know, no, not that. You know, they're looking for what they want. And the other piece is time. Like there's a sexual nine I'm working with that was like, God, he wants me to make a decision about dinner on Friday. You know, it's like it's that hard, right? But if I was informed on Tuesday that I had to make a decision about where to go to dinner on Friday, a decision that I would fear that he may not like, that I'll have responsibility for like the decision that someone else doesn't like, someone I care about, right? And so, but just giving time, giving a space of withdrawal, because energetically, a dominant energy can be so much that it's hard for you to get clear. And so just knowing these things are so helpful, but frankly, just continuing to ask and have the people who love you ask, what do you want? And giving space and time for that to emerge, right? So that's vital. But I want to make sure I read this. Ashley, I'm a 9 and my hubby is a 3. We are working on just this. He is the decision maker while I go with the flow. He's recently expressed it's exhausting making all the decisions, so I must step up. What a powerful moment for you, Ashley. You know, like I want to honor how difficult that can be, you know, because it is like you get into this like pattern and it creates a kind of groove and rut and it's like comfortable, but it is also such a gift, right? Because of course there's a part of every soul and every being that wants to be like, what about me? You know, and it's like rather than taking it as a burden or a responsibility, really giving yourself a chance to like experiment with like trying, like not looking at like I've got to come to the right and perfect dinner decision, or you know, something as simple as that. Like, oh well, let's experiment with this and try, and then both of us may not like it, and letting that be okay. So thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for being here, Lindsay. I look forward to hearing your comments later about how the compare and contrast. I want to give you the opportunity, Ogun, if there's any remaining thoughts you have as we close our time together.
No, I think I kind of covered it all, but I always say to people, give yourself space and grace. Space and grace, because even if you know all these things, in the moment, depending on the person and the situation, there's a lot of defaulting that happens, and give yourself space and grace. I didn't get it this time, but now that I am aware, can I be loving with myself? You know, it's nice in the love. Can I be loving with myself, be patient with myself, forgive myself, and then be more mindful the next time around? So space and grace. And you can find me online at revogunholder.com and projectsanctus.com. That's my new online ministry. And I actually got to run right now.
All right, perfect timing.
Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Ogun. Take care.
I'll see you later.
Everyone.
Bye.
Joined us. Bye.